This is the Humber Estuary, ancient barrier between Lincolnshire and East Yorkshire, and one of the UK's greatest wetlands. It's 40 miles long, fed by 8 major rivers, channeling the rain from 1/5 of the surface of England. Its sheltered waters support one of Britain's largest port complexes and numerous major chemical and power industries. In addition, it's the winter holiday destination of choice for hundreds of thousands of migrating birds. I'm Kevin Bayes. I work for an organisation called the Humber Nature Partnership, and I've been passionate about bird conservation for over 30 years. This is a programme about one of the largest mass migrations of animals on the planet. You may have heard of the migrations of wildebeest in Africa, or perhaps the caribou crossing North America. But I wonder if you've heard about the 90 million birds that use the East Atlantic Flyway. It's even more spectacular. 400,000 people live around the Humber Estuary, and every day, epic dramas of endurance, evolution, life and death play out on their doorsteps. For those of us who visit estuaries in autumn and winter and notice the swirling flocks of birds, how often do we spare a thought for the incredible feats of endurance and the remarkable navigational skills that enabled the birds to get here? Each individual bird has its own unique and extraordinary story to tell. We're going to uncover some of those stories. I know the Humber pretty well, but I'm meeting someone who spent a lifetime living here, working on and studying the estuary. Yorkshire Wildlife Trust Site Manager, Andy Gibson. Andy, beautiful morning here on the Humber. Humberston itself, fantastic place to watch birds, but there are so many great places on the Humber to watch birds. Why is that?
Sheer scale of the place. You know, it's got what birds need. It's got the expanse, it's got the mud flats for sitting on, it's got the feeding areas, it's got the climate, it's got all they need to survive, and they just need that space to survive within.
It is an incredible place. And yeah, it's huge, isn't it? I mean, you said the scale. It's something like 36,000 hectares of estuary here, which sounds quite big, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's quite hard to imagine.
It is, yeah, very much so, very much so.
But the numbers of birds that we have here need that space to exist, to survive.
So we're looking out, as you say, over sort of mud flats and sand flats and big areas of mud flats and sand flats here at Humberston. But we've also got the salt marsh right next to the sand flats here.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably there's something important about the juxtaposition of those habitats.
Depending on the species, each one has its own little niche.
Okay. We've talked about waders and ducks and geese, and that's essentially what we can see in front of us. So as you were saying before, you know, oyster catchers, curlew, red shank on the waders, Brent geese, shelduck in front of us. This is all about wetland birds, isn't it? This is a big wetland habitat. It's about water.
Yeah. It's also about daily changing water, and many of us don't like change. So these birds, these species are living with constant change.
Yeah.
When I say that, every 12 hours that habitat changes from a terrestrial one to a marine one.
Yes.
So as we've been stood here talking, the tide's dropped further, and out in front the Brent geese have wandered down the mud flats. Interestingly, some of them have gone all the way out onto the sandbar, which looks absolutely lifeless to us from here.
Yeah, indeed.
But in between the distant Brent geese, there's curlew, there's red shank on the softer muds.
Oh yeah, I've got curlew. Yeah, that amazing beak. Yeah, you can't miss them, can you? They are an incredible looking bird.
The Humber's brown, not because it's dirty, it's because it's got sediments in it. And it's those sediments that make the mudflats that them waders want.
And that's the crunch, isn't it? So yeah, this
Yeah.
idea that the Humber's just this kind of muddy river. No,
Yeah.
it's not. It's the most amazing estuary, and that mud is what, as you say, creates these mudflats, creates the habitats that these birds are after. We're kind of introducing this idea of bird migration, aren't we? The fact that birds are only here for part of the year. So the birds we're talking about are primarily here over autumn, winter, maybe early spring. But it does beg the question of why birds migrate in the first place, doesn't it? So it costs them a lot. You know, you've talked about energy use in birds. You imagine how much energy they use flying all that way. Why do they bother?
Very simple. The places where they breed has the most amount of food and daylight hours to enable them to reproduce. And within birds, as within most animals, it's about reproducing and keeping that species going.
Mm-hmm.
This is the best place to winter to feed. Once they've done that here, they're wanting to move north because it's better there to feed and breed.
Okay, and of course, during the winter, these northerly places will all freeze up.
Solid.
Absolutely. So no food there for them, so they have to move.
Yeah.
And this is one of the places that they move.
We are part of that bigger picture, which is the East Coast Flyway, which is, you know, the whole of Europe, the whole of northern Russia.
Yeah.
We shouldn't look at ourselves in isolation.
It seems to me that we need to get kind of better at understanding how birds are using the estuary in more detail. So if we can identify the best bits and say, look, let's kind of try and hang on to these best bits, then maybe there's a way that we can, you know, harmonise the use for the birds and the use for people and make sure that we all get the most out of the estuary. The Humber is one of a series of bird motorway service stations with adjacent high-end accommodation which stretch all the way down the west coast of Europe, around the east and west coast of Britain, down into the Mediterranean and on into West Africa. Some birds even go further, as far as South Africa and beyond. 90 million birds of nearly 300 species use this bird motorway every spring and autumn.
Birds which have spent spring and summer in the high Arctic and northern Europe suddenly decide it's time to move south before the snows of winter arrive, and they relocate to their favourite winter sun destinations like Cleethorpes and Hull. Some of the most spectacular long-range migrants are the waders, a whole family of specialist shorebirds with their long legs and stabbing beaks. We have over a dozen common wader species on the Humber. They have great names like the bar-tailed godwit, the ring plover, and the avocet. These birds are dependent on this chain of estuaries staying intact. Each location is like a stepping stone. Remove one stone and the pathway falls apart. The chain is essential in the lives of the breeding birds of many different countries, hence their international importance. Let's meet the first star of our show, the dunlin, our smallest wader. And it is small. A big one weighs in about 60 grams, around 2 ounces. They are tiny, but they are super cute. I've got a real soft spot for dunlin. When you see them feeding, they're just like little clockwork mice. So we're talking small, a very striking, beady, inquisitive black eye, and a rather delicately curved, medium-sized bill. Comparatively short legs. Always on the go. Despite their small size, these plucky little birds are still quite capable of flying 2,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean.
The second of our star species is the red shank, another common wader here on the estuary, a medium-sized wader, and it has amazingly bright red legs, so it's incredibly obvious.
Most of the red shank on the Humber are from Icelandic or Northern European populations. Many just pass through. We have peaks in numbers on the estuary in September and October, and again in April. But some stay, and there are red shank with us all through the winter, Whether these are a particular set of birds, or whether there is a constant passage of birds through the estuary, with comings and goings the whole time, we can't be sure. It's almost certainly a mixture of both, forming a very complex web of movements. Our third star wader is the curlew. This one really stands out in the crowd. It's our largest wader. It has a fabulous long down-curved beak. Of our 3 stars, this species is the most threatened. It's just after midnight on a rather chilly October evening. We're here on the north bank of the Humber to meet up with the Humber Wader Ringing Group. What we hope is that we're going to catch curlews in a large mist net down on the shore about 300 metres away from where we are, and then those birds will be brought to the vehicles and we'll have a little technological backpack put on, and will give us a great deal of detailed information about the habitats they use and the places they go.
And we started last winter by tagging 2 curlews. We already tagged 2 of this year. So we first ID the species of wader.
So we need to know what species it
exactly,
is.
what species. Once we've done that, we can take some measurements, taking bill length. We can take wing length, the tarsus as well, the length of
that's the part of the leg, yeah?
part of the leg,
Yeah.
the weight, and that gives an idea of the condition of the bird, really.
Okay. Heavier birds are actually in better condition.
Yes,
yeah?
and are more likely to survive the winter.
Okay.
We had a fantastic night with the Wader Ringing Group, but sadly we didn't catch any curlews. We know that the UK curlew population has halved over the past 20 years. What are the reasons for that? Do we have any influence on it? The Humber Estuary, a vast wetland, a mosaic of habitats like mudflats, salt marsh, reed beds. A brilliant, brilliant place to see wild birds like waders, and ducks and geese, and a great place to study them. Oh, hi Luca.
Oh, hi Kevin.
Luca, thanks very much for meeting up today. Great way to catch Dunlin red shank. No curlew. Why do you think we didn't catch curlew?
Curlew, it's a rapidly declining species, and the status has been uplifted to near threatened because of the rates of their decline.
Yeah, curlew, we know from previous studies that males and females have different length beaks, don't they? What difference does that make?
It makes a big difference. So, having a shorter bill, the male is excluded from the mudflats as the invertebrates bury deeper.
Oh, right, okay.
In winter.
Yeah.
So they have to top up the diet by feeding inland. So you can see the male curlew using some of the arbor field to
Yes.
feed.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Whilst a female bird is staying on the tidal flats.
And that's really different. You can see the difference in the distribution. That is absolutely brilliant.
And that has implication really for the winter survival of both male and female, and show the importance really of some of the habitats inland of the estuary.
So, and you know, in terms of conservation of the birds, you've got to have both sets of habitats. You've got to have the male habitats and the female habitats as well.
Let's go back to what draws these huge bird populations to the Humber. Central to the whole ecology of the estuary are the mudflats. It's hard to persuade people that these sticky, dirty expanses are so important. But they are.
I'm here this morning to speak with James Thurlow. James is a specialist on estuaries. James, thanks for meeting us today.
Pleasure.
We're here to talk about mud.
Yes. And now we're going to go and dig some up.
Excellent. So which way are we heading, James? To
We're just
this
going,
side?
yeah, straight out.
Straight through, yeah.
Yeah. This looks like a good spot. Let's see what we've got here. There's plenty of bird tracks here, so
And there's also these little tracks on the surface of the mud, aren't
That's
there?
right.
And when you do that, you can see little air
yeah, you can see the
bubbles coming
burrows
up.
clearly, and this is absolutely riddled with burrows. So there's plenty living in here, which is why the birds are feeding.
Oh, that's
Yep.
superb.
Lots for the birds to eat here. Right,
Superb.
let's take some pieces of this back.
Okay.
There we go.
Super.
So we can see that the mud is full of burrows. So we'll just take a couple of chunks here and I'll put it in our little sieve. Let's give it a rinse and see what we find.
Good high-tech stuff, isn't it?
If we were doing this scientifically, we'd be doing this a bit more carefully and a bit more slowly. Try not to wash everything through the sieve. Small polychaete worm, and there's some carophium in there as well, which is very abundant in the mud here across the whole estuary, and which the birds find as favourite food. They live in shallow burrows near the surface. They look a bit like miniature lobsters, but they're not. And the birds can use their long pointy bills to get down in the mud and harvest them.
There's a couple of worms in there, one of which is sort of significantly bigger than the others. Are they're likely to be the same species, or would they be different species?
We've got a nice little polychaete worm in there, and there's some carophium that we can see as well.
So that's the carophium there, yeah?
That's the carophium, yeah, and there's another one in there as well.
Oh, okay.
Most creatures live in the top 10-15 centimetres though, because there's less oxygen as you go down, and the sediment is generally softer towards the surface, so this is more favourable conditions for them. They are superbly adapted. So you can see he can wriggle his way through the water, and this is how his little extensions on the side help him move up and down in his burrow. These guys can dive into their burrows incredibly quickly.
And superb bird food.
Yes, absolutely. This is top quality protein for the birds.
So if you were something like a godwit, you could get right down to the bottom of that with your lung sort of.
That's right.
10 centimetre beak, you go right down.
Different bird species will specialise in different prey.
So yeah, something like godwits and curlews, presumably after the larger worms. Dunlin, much smaller bird, smaller beak. Yeah. So presumably they'd be looking for smaller worms and carophium in particular. Yeah.
I mean, your bigger birds with the longer beaks are going to have to pull something out that's much more reluctant and much deeper.
And presumably sort of bigger energy packages, otherwise, if you're a big bird, it would take an awful lot of carophium to fill you up, wouldn't it?
Exactly. If you watch the red shanks feeding, they're spending a lot of time just pulling out carophium one at a time.
Yeah, that's amazing. How birds find their way between their summer breeding grounds and their wintering sites is another story in itself. We know that birds navigate using the sun, they can use the stars at night, and they can use the Earth's magnetic field. We found recently that birds have tiny magnets in their beaks to help them. It's an extraordinary adaptation, but there's so much more to learn in this field.
Bird migration flights use up enormous amounts of energy. They build up this energy by feeding hard in the days leading up to their flight. We know dunlin can increase their weight from 50 grams to 80 grams, an increase of 30%. That's like me going up from 12 stone to 16 stone. I'm nearly at my peak flying weight now. Taken in total, the target wetland birds have declined over the past 10 years, from a peak of about 175,000 to 119,000. That's a decrease of 30% on one of the most important estuaries in the country. For conservationists, that's disconcerting to say the least. So what's causing this decline? Year on year, we seem to see increasing disturbance of estuary birds, particularly when the tide is in and the space to move around the estuary edges is limited, both for the birds and for us. So the question is bird disturbance a real problem?
Tanya, thanks very much for meeting up with us today. We'd like to talk to you about recreational disturbance, which is a strange idea, strange concept. Can we unpack it a bit? What do we mean by disturbance?
Say you've got a bird just out here, it's feeding. It might look up, it might just walk away, or it might fly away. And it could actually fly away quite a distance because it's that frightened by the event that's taken place.
So that's disturbance. Why might that be an issue?
These birds are flying away from an important area on the estuary. They're here because it's a great place to feed, and they can be quite site loyal. So if they're disturbed, they're using extra energy to try and survive. So if there's big disturbance happening regularly, it could impact on their survival.
So that's disturbance. Recreation.
Yes.
So yeah, we all kind of know, I think, what we mean by recreation. But what types of recreational activities are we thinking about here?
Well, on the Humber, there's been a lot of studies over the past 10 years or so to understand what sort of recreational activities to take place. And actually, the Humber's used for a lot of different reasons for enjoyment. So out on the sea itself, there might be paddle boarders, jet skis. In the air, you might have small aircraft and drones, which has become more popular now. And then actually just around the estuary, you might have bird watchers, walkers, and actually there are a lot of dog walkers we found as well.
We've seen quite a few dog walkers this morning. Why are these an issue?
What we have found is dogs, and particularly dogs off leads, cause the biggest response in birds.
Why do you think that is?
Well, if you think about a bird and how it would view a dog, it would see it as a predator. So it's essentially scared. It could attack the bird. So the bird's flying away to escape from that potential threat of an attack.
Yeah. We see dog, they see wolf.
Exactly.
Right,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, so they're just responding to what they see as a threat. And the dog itself might not be a threat. Could be just what could be a tiny little chihuahua, which we know wouldn't be a threat at all, but a bird would still see a dog, any dog, as a threat, and will respond to it. And we've seen that a lot on the Humber, that the biggest response to a human activity through recreation is through particularly those dogs off leads.
And it is only dogs off leads, isn't it? Yeah. So we were here the other day and we were seeing lots of dogs all happily walking up and down the beach and playing with their ball, and people throwing sticks for them and so on. But just one or two dogs decided that they wanted to go out onto the mud and chase the birds. They're the ones that are creating the issue, really, isn't it?
So I think a lot of it is that potentially dog walkers aren't aware of the estuary and its importance for birds, particularly during winter, and that their dog could cause an impact to the bird population on the Humber. So we know that there are lots of responsible dog walkers out there. But at that particular sensitive time of the year, during the winter, when the birds are finding it a little bit more difficult, if you're walking your dog and it's off a lead and you know that dog might like to go and chase birds, it's potentially a good idea to just slip the lead on your dog and make sure it's not going off.
So it's really simple, and just little changes could make a big difference.
Yeah, just being aware of the potential spots around your favourite part of the estuary where you might start to actually see that there are big flocks of birds. You might not have never noticed it before, and it makes you aware of what a wonderful place the estuary is. Just to be aware of these sensitive places around the estuary and the things that you can do.
Could an increase in disturbance around the estuary account for the bird decline? Well, from what we know from the energetic studies, it is at the very least a contributing factor. Excessive disturbance could cause birds to move away from the estuary prematurely. It could affect their ability to get into good breeding condition. And under really bad circumstances, it could lead directly to a bird's death. But if we wanted to do our bit, and I think most of us now realise how vitally important our environment is to our well-being, we can influence the outcome, just a little, by trying not to disturb them. Remember, don't approach them too closely. Don't let your dog approach them too closely. If the birds fly off, you were too close. Remember that for next time and give them a little more space. As you approach bird flocks, pop your dog on a lead until you've gone past them. These little changes will help to ensure that we're doing our bit for conservation.
If you stop and think about the extraordinary feats these small creatures have undertaken to be with us here on the Humber, it is literally awe-inspiring. More birds die on migration than any other time of year. But evolution has adapted them to achieve the incredible. They're nothing short of feathered miracles, and we need to do all we can to ensure that these amazing birds are here for future generations to enjoy.